It wasn't pretty, and boy, oh boy, do I mean it was not pretty, but the Zags held on and beat San Francisco 77-72 despite horrific late game execution from Mark Few's team. Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Friday and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Well, the Zags aren't going to make anything easy this season, and they had an opportunity to pull away with a relatively easy win over the Dons of San Francisco. Unfortunately, were unable to do so until the final seconds. A lot of heart attack-inducing results for Mark Few's team this year. This was the 28th consecutive win over the Dons. We're going to talk more about this game in the first segment. We're also going to talk about our 5 keys to the game before the game that we discussed and kind of what ended up happening with those. We'll close out today's show previewing Gonzaga's game against the Pacific Tigers on Saturday and talking about what happened to them when they played St. Mary's on Thursday evening. We'll start here talking about this game. The Zags beat San Francisco. The Dons have not beat Gonzaga in Spokane since 1989, which was something I was not expecting to hear on the broadcast yesterday from Sean Farnham and Dave Fleming. Some fun stuff from them. As always, love having them on the call. Obviously, Gonzaga and San Francisco have had a lot of epic battles at War Memorial. I remember when I was a student, that was always a close game, and that's kind of what this reminded me of. And it's kind of a theme that has come up a few times on this podcast. It's a narrative we've heard about the team a little bit, and I think the recent run of Gonzaga's success, the 8 straight Sweet 16s, the years and years of being ranked inside the AP Top 25 since 2016 has reframed how we think about the Gonzaga basketball program. And they've always been this dominant team in the WCC. Obviously, the NCAA tournament streak is staggering, but they haven't always just blown through everybody in the conference. And this game was kind of a reminder of that. Obviously, the Santa Clara loss was a really tough one. The first half where they were tied with Pepperdine was a tough one until they ended up blowing them out. But this is the kind of rock fight that Gonzaga has. This isn't that uncommon for Gonzaga in the Mark Few era. It just hasn't been common recently. And I think it's causing a lot of concern. And it's understandably so. And I think it's multifaceted. It is absolutely partially that this Gonzaga team is not up to the par of the Jalen Suggs Gonzaga teams or even any of the Drew Timme Gonzaga teams. And, the 2017 team that went to the national championship. Like, this team is not as good as those teams. I don't think that that's an unreasonable take at all. In fact, it would be unreasonable to kind of have the opposite take, I think. But it's also an element of those WCC teams getting better. That San Francisco team is good. And they didn't play all that well and still almost won. And I think that's a testament to how these teams are not that far apart from each other. And you can see that bear out in the KenPom rankings. I think Gonzaga, I haven't checked the most updated refresh, but they're probably in the mid-20s, maybe late 20s. And San Francisco has been in like the 50s. So they're not that far apart. And net has them fairly close as well. And so I think that part of it is the WCC has improved, which is something that Mark Few really emphasized that he wanted those teams to be able to do, and they have. And part of it is that this Gonzaga team is not quite as good. But again, close games against San Francisco is something that Gonzaga fans who followed this team 10, 15 years ago saw quite a bit. So it's not like this is that unprecedented, but this one shouldn't have been as close as it was. And that was what was so frustrating about it. I think we'll start with the good things that happened in this game. The defense was great. Gonzaga's defense was really, really good in this game against a pretty good offensive team. San Francisco is a better defensive team than they are an offensive team, and that showed in this game without a doubt. I thought they looked very good on the defensive end of the floor, and simultaneously Gonzaga got kind of flustered, especially in the first half. But Gonzaga's defense was excellent. They held San Francisco to 39% shooting, and a lot of that came in the very end of the game. They were 37% until the last couple of minutes. They shot 33% from 3. the San Francisco did. That's a better 3-point shooting team than that typically. And again, they made made a handful at the end that kind of boosted up that percentage. USF had 15 turnovers. That's probably your difference in this game. I said before the game that whichever team wins the rebounding battle is going to win this game, and I was wrong about that because San Francisco did win on the glass. But the main reason Gonzaga was able to win despite losing the rebounding battle is that they forced San Francisco into a bunch of turnovers, converted those into points on the other end of the floor, and the defense clamped down and forced somebody like Malik Thomas to shoot 2 of 10. Jonathan Mobo only had 8 points. He's their leading scorer, one of the WCC Player of the Year candidates, and he had 8 points. Like, that is a testament to what Gonzaga was able to do. And while their offense is not at the level that we're used to seeing from the last half decade or so, this defense is very good. And it's going to help them win basketball games this year. The other good thing, Ben Gregg and Graham Ike at the free throw line, because nobody else at the free throw line was good. And Ben, when they needed him to seal this game, when San Francisco chose to foul him intentionally to put him on the line, to try to get him to miss some free throws and potentially get themselves back in the game. Anton Watson didn't deliver in that situation. Ryan Nembhard did not deliver in that situation, but Graham Ike and Ben Gregg did. Graham finished 10 of 11 from the free throw line. Ben finished 4 of 4. Without those guys hitting those shots at the end of the game, this could be a very, very different result that we're talking about here on Locked On Zags. Moving over to the bad, yeah, we just touched on it. The late game execution in this game was horrendous. The free throw shooting overall was incredibly bad, 22 of 34. That's 64.7%. Again, as a reminder, Ben Gregg and Graham Ike combined shot 14 of 15. The rest of the team, horrible from the free throw line. Anton Watson went 3 of 9. This has never been a strength of his, but my goodness, when you're the team's best player, you have to deliver at the free. I mean, this just cannot happen. It cannot happen. I'm a huge Anton Watson supporter. Those of you who've been listening to the podcast for years know that. I've constantly been banging the drum for Anton, but this is a huge glaring hole in his game that is a significant problem for Gonzaga. San Francisco started fouling Anton Watson with 2.5 minutes to go in this game, and they almost won because of it. I mean, that was a big reason they almost won this game. A shout out to Coach Chris Gerlofson for choosing to use that strategy. It almost worked. Came as close to working as I think it could have for them. They pressed, they tried to get turnovers. If they couldn't, they made Gonzaga get rid of the basketball to somebody like Anton Watson, somebody like Graham Ike, somebody like Ben Gregg. In instances where they fouled Anton Watson, it worked. Graham and Ben delivered. Ryan Nembhard, 1 of 4. He went 4 of 8 from the free throw line in the game, but 1 of 4 in the last 2 minutes of this game. That is inexcusably bad. For a player who shoots 85% from the free throw line, to have missed what would have probably been a game-winning free throw against Santa Clara on the road last week, and now to go 1 of 4 in clutch situations from the free throw line in this game, I mean, that's inexcusable again. Mark Few is not going to be happy about that at all. I mean, it just cannot happen. I don't know what else to say about it. That cannot happen. That is just unbelievable to be unable to help ice a game like that. To need Ben Gregg to do it. I mean, shout out to Ben. He's a 72% free throw shooter on the year, so it's not like he's been bad in that spot, but for him to step up and knock all 4 of those down, I mean, that's a testament to his growth and his development. And to shout out to Graham as well. He was masterful at the free throw line all game long, and really just masterful in the game all game long. We'll talk a little bit more about him in the second segment, but he played a fantastic basketball game, and Gonzaga needed every bit of it to win this one. Other things outside of the late game execution, which was bad, and the free throw shooting, which was very bad. The Zags they played a sloppy first half. Both teams, I think, were kind of trying to feel each other out and adjust to the adjustments that they were making. And San Francisco really packed in the paint and kind of gave Gonzaga a lot of opportunities to shoot threes, and they struggled. 5 of 14 from 3 in the first half, and Gonzaga made some adjustments in the second half and force-fed the ball to Graham Ike in a way that really worked for them. But it was not a pretty first half. I already mentioned the Zags got out-rebounded in this game. That was a huge emphasis for Coach Gerlofson. He spoke about it on the Thursday episode of Locked On Zags about how rebounding is the biggest thing he's focused on, and his team went out and won that battle. They went out and got enough rebounds to put themselves in a position to win this game, which I'm sure he was happy about after the game, but unfortunately the results for them in the win column just didn't show up. Braden Huff had a really rough game. Another player, we've talked about him, the highs and lows of Braden Huff, and he's a freshman, and it's just going to happen. I think this just wasn't a good matchup for him. 0 of 5 from the field. He had 3 turnovers. He grabbed a couple decent rebounds, but just didn't have it in this one. And consistency is the biggest thing for Braden going forward. He hasn't been consistent throughout the year. He has games where he entirely disappears. He has games where he immediately dominates as soon as he comes in the game. And I think, people have already asked me mailbag questions about, can he be the next Drew Timme? Can he lead the team in scoring? Like blah, blah, blah. It's like, you have to be, that's the thing that's different with Drew. That's the difference with Drew and somebody like Graham Ike as well. Like Ike is not as consistent as Drew. Drew did it night in and night out. And expecting Braden to be Drew is ridiculous. You shouldn't have that expectation on anybody. But he's clearly not there because he's not doing it night in and night out. And maybe he'll get to a point where he's more consistent. I'm sure that he will, but he was a non-factor in this game. And Gonzaga just basically didn't play him in the second half of this game unless they had to, because he just didn't show up for this one. But we're going to talk more about the Graham Ike versus Jonathan Mobo battle, which was won by Graham. We're also going to talk about why that was a huge part of Gonzaga securing a victory, a couple other things that helped lead the Zags to this win, all that coming up after a word from today's sponsor, Game Time. The big game is coming up, and it is in Las Vegas. And if you had an extra $100 in Las Vegas, what would you do with it? I think I'd be going to Legacy Stadium at the Venetian. That place is one of my favorites. If you wanted to do that, go. Game Time is the fast and it is the easy way to buy tickets for all of the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And right now, new users get $100 off when they buy a big game ticket with code Vegas100. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time has exactly what you need. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event, and thankfully Game Time, well, they got you covered because they have deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Right now, all Game Time users get $100 off a big game ticket with code Vegas100. Terms do apply. Just download the Game Time app and use code Vegas100 for $100 off a big game ticket. Or if you're not going to the game, use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2 here. Still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're still talking Gonzaga's narrow win over the Dons of San Francisco on Thursday at the McCarthey Athletic Center. It was great to have the student section back for the first time in a while. For those of you who missed this, there's a great video circulating the internet of Nolan Hickman celebrating with the kennel before the game, doing all the jumps and doing all the celebrations with them. It was fantastic, really fun to watch. Definitely go find that if you have not yet. What I want to do now is from Wednesday's episode, I laid out 5 keys to this game, 5 things I thought Gonzaga needed to do to ensure a victory. We're going to take a look at how those things ended up going in this game and whether they had an impact on that final score or not. Key number 1 was to take care of the basketball. San Francisco, a team that forces a lot of turnovers. Gonzaga had been on a really good streak of not turning over the basketball. And honestly, that continued in a major way. Gonzaga only had 3 turnovers in the first half of this game. They finished with 7. As much as there was consternation about Gonzaga's late game execution, as much as the first half was sloppy with their outside shooting and unable to pick up a lead really and kind of carry a lead really until the last 5 or 6 minutes of this game when Gonzaga finally kind of busted out to that 10-point lead and then pretty much handed it away at the end of the game, turnovers were not an issue. Ryan Nembhard's streak ended early in the game. He had a turnover, but he still had 6 assists and 2 turnovers against a good defensive team, the second best defensive team that they're going to face in the WCC. 6 assists and 2 turnovers, not bad at all. Nembhard overall had a good game outside of those final free throws, which was just a big stain on an otherwise solid performance for him. But turnovers was a huge factor in this game. San Francisco had 15 of them. Gonzaga had 7. In a 5-point game, that is a huge difference maker. So another area that Gonzaga has continued to grow this year as they've gotten more comfortable with each other is the ability to avoid those sloppy turnovers, those turnovers that lead out to easy transition buckets for San Francisco. There just weren't really very many of those for Gonzaga, and that was a big strength for this team in this game. Key number 2 was to crash the glass. And this is where I said on Wednesday's show that I believe whatever team wins the rebounding battle will win the game. That was not the case. San Francisco had an 8-point rebounding advantage in the first half, and they ended up finishing the game with a 9-point rebounding advantage. So Gonzaga kind of closed the gap a little bit, or didn't really close the gap, but kept it a little closer in the second half, I should say, against San Francisco. Still got out-rebounded 41-32. Felt like there was every 50-50 ball went San Francisco's way in this one. It just felt like there was some lucky bounces, which is just part of basketball. It's just what happens. There was some times where San Francisco just outfought Gonzaga for the basketball. And that's just one of those things that, this Gonzaga team in particular, they can't do that. You need to win those battles. You need to be the aggressor. You need to be the one diving on the floor for loose balls and getting getting every opportunity you can to score in this game, because They're not going to just be able to go on those 15-0 runs and set teams down the way that they have in the past. And even in this game, they went on a nice run. They started to look like they were putting the team away, and then weren't able to actually close it out in a comfortable fashion. And rebounding was a factor here. 13-6 was the offensive rebounding advantage for the Dons. 13 offensive rebounds for San Francisco. Again, that's just an issue that Gonzaga is going to need to fix, especially when they play the three big lineup. And they went away from it a little bit more in this game, in part because Dusty Stromer had a good game and he was effective in this contest. Not super effective shooting, but I thought he took good shots. I thought he played good defense. He forced a couple turnovers, but not having him not having the three big lineup as often. Part of that was Anton Watson picking up 2 early fouls and having to sit for a large chunk of the first half, which kind of hurts them on the glass. But, like I said, San Francisco set out intentionally to beat Gonzaga on the boards, and they managed to do it. And Gonzaga still managed to find a way to win despite that. But that's not a battle they can lose too many more times and expect to keep getting W's. Key number 3 was the Graham Ike versus Jonathan Mobo matchup. The Zags won this one. And it was, again, outside the turnovers, this was a huge, huge factor. And it didn't look like they were going to win in the first half. Ike had 3 points on 1 of 3 shooting in the first half. Mobo had 4 points on 2 of 3 shooting. Neither player was a major factor in the first half, and you could tell part of that was simply because both teams had game planned against each other. Gonzaga had planned to take away Jonathan Mobo. They put Anton Watson on him. He's the best on-ball defensive player in the conference, one of the best in the entire country, and he just followed Mobo all game long in the first half until he was out with the fouls. He was all over him for much of the second half as well. And then in the second half, Mobo, who had 4 in the first half, also had 4 in the second half. Meanwhile, Graham Ike had 19 in the second half, finished with 22. 6 of 10 from the floor for Graham, 10 of 11 from the free throw line. Again, that's where a lot of his damage came. Some of it came at the very end of the game, but he had a monster second half outside of just those final few minutes when he was getting fouled. Really, really good performance from Graham. Again, we talked about this recently, him kind of knowing that he needed to step into a bigger role, and Mark Few pulled him aside before the San Diego State game and said, hey, man, we need you to be that guy. Like, you need to be the aggressor. You are our offensive focal point. We're going to play through you. That's the role you need to fill. And he has. Up to that point, he had a rough game against Santa Clara, but he has been that guy for Gonzaga ever since. And without him in this game, they don't win. I mean, he was an unbelievably critical part. For Mobo, I was very surprised at how his game went. 8 points on 4 of 6 shooting. He had 11 rebounds. He had 4 assists. I thought he should have taken more shots. There was many opportunities where he got offensive rebounds and immediately kicked it out. He started to drive and made a pass. He pump faked and then just kicked it out. Like, I thought he would be a more aggressive offensive player than he was. And my expectation from speaking with Coach Carlson, from watching their previous games, is that was abnormal, what we saw from him. I don't know whether that was game planned, which seems odd. I don't know why they wouldn't have attacked more with him, whether he didn't feel comfortable going at Graham Ike or Anton Watson, what the situation was. I don't really know, but it was very odd to me. I think the broadcast talked about this a bit, and we talked about with Coach Carlson on Thursday's show. He came into the situation at San Francisco having been a very much a role player at Missouri State, only averaged 8 points per game there, wasn't asked to really play the offense through him, and San Francisco put him in a different role, and he has thrived. He's averaging 15 and 10 coming into that game. So for him to then kind of almost step back into more of a role-playing situation, I thought was interesting, because Graham Ike had 4 fouls, and there was times when Mobo had the ball, should have attacked him, drive right into him, put your body into his chest, make him go straight up, make him play really passive, because he can't pick up that 5th foul. If Mobo drove into Graham Ike in a situation where he had the ball with like 6 or 7 minutes left, and Graham had 4 fouls, if Graham picked up his 5th foul, Zags may not win this game. Like, that was a huge moment in the game, and Mobo chose to pass the ball out. Meanwhile, Malik Thomas and Marcus Williams did not have good shooting nights. Williams kind of found his shot at the very end of the game when San Francisco was pulling off that comeback, but it was odd to see Mobo not be that aggressive, and I think that might have honestly hurt them in a pretty big way in this game. Key number 4 for Gonzaga was to find the outside shot, but also don't overly rely on it. And honestly, check. I thought Gonzaga did this. They were 5 of 14 in the first half. And it feels like, oh, that's a horrible 3-point shooting first half. That's 35%. It's really not that bad. You honestly take that. And Nolan Hickman hit a few really clutch threes in the first half. Just seemed like whenever they needed a bucket, Nolan Hickman knocked it down. And I want to give him a shout out. He had a good game throughout in this contest. Couple turnovers that were not great, but that's kind of part of the Nolan Hickman experience, if we're being honest. But him hitting clutch threes was really necessary. But they were too over-reliant on threes in the first half. 35% is not terrible, but 5 for 14. It felt like they were settling for threes a lot of the time. Part of that was they were trying to respond to San Francisco's defense, and San Francisco was taking away Graham Ike. They were double-teaming him immediately. They were packing in the paint. Gonzaga didn't have Anton Watson on the floor, so when they can't get the ball to Ike, there's no Watson. They settle for a lot of threes. But they only went 2 of 7 in the second half. 2 of 7, of course, is not a particularly great efficiency, but they only took 7. They took half as many threes in the second half as they did in the first half. And that was an adjustment very clearly that Mark Few and the staff made at halftime. And they said, we have to find other ways to score. We cannot keep getting reliant on shooting threes. And they didn't. And in the second half, they force-fed the ball to Graham Ike more. He absolutely dominated. He got a lot of and ones. Anton Watson got more involved in the offense on the block at some times as well. And we saw more drives to the basket. Some of them didn't work. Nolan Hickman and Ryan Nembhard driving to the basket, getting blocked, missing lands. But I like that we saw more of that than just settling for those outside shots, because those weren't going down. And again, Gonzaga pulled away from this game in the second half, and they did it without the three-point shot. So we wanted to see them be better at the three-point line, which they were. 33%. It's not great, but it's okay. And we also wanted to see them not be as reliant on it, and they did that as well. Key number 5 was to play a full 40 minutes of basketball. Just didn't happen. It's been rare this year that Gonzaga's played a full 40. It's been one of the most frustrating parts of this team. In a season full of a lot of frustrations about this Gonzaga men's team, not being able to play a full 40-minute basketball game has been a big part of them. I mean, against Pepperdine, they had a first half where they ended up tied and then blew them out by 25 points. They played a full game against San Diego. Great. They played a full game against Pepperdine the first time and against San Diego the other time as well. But outside of that, they're not playing a lot of full 40-minute basketball games, and it's frustrating. And in this game, I mean, they really had a really good stretch in the second half, and that was it. They didn't play that terrible in the first half. Again, San Francisco's a good team. Like, being close with San Francisco doesn't necessarily mean Gonzaga played terrible. In fact, San Francisco played pretty bad in the first half. Both teams didn't play very well. But for Gonzaga to finally put together a good stretch in the second half of this game and then also not close it out, it's just really, really hard to watch. This team is challenging to watch because of that, because they're not putting together these streaks. They're not putting together these runs. And again, part of it is the spoiled nature, frankly, of what we've seen from this team in the last 7 or 8 years. But it's hard to come back to this, where at any given moment, they might give up a 5-0 run, 8-0 run, turn the ball over a few times in a row. Like, you just want to see this team play a full 40, and we just haven't gotten to see it very much this year. Well, hopefully they'll get a chance to do exactly that on Saturday when they take on the Tigers of Pacific, the worst team in the WCC, and quite honestly, one of the worst teams in all of college basketball. We're going to talk about them and what we expect to see on Saturday night. Coming up after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are rolling right along, and there is still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app is super easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, like their live same-game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab, or you can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays. Folks, Gonzaga's women's team is still 24,000 to 1 odds to win the national championship. They played their toughest WCC game on Thursday on the road at Santa Clara, and they obliterated them. Yes, Santa Clara is not a national championship contender, but the way this team is playing, folks, a $5 bet nets you $1,200 if the Lady Zags pull off the impossible. If you're like me and you think that's worth the risk, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. All right, folks, closing out the show today, moving on to talk about Gonzaga's opponent on Saturday, the Tigers of Pacific, January 27th at 7 p.m. Pacific time. The game will be on KHQ in the Spokane market. It will be on Route in the Seattle-Portland Route Sports Northwest area market. And then for those out of market, it'll be on ESPN Plus. Again, if you want to join us on our Discord channel, we're helping people find where these streams are, where they can watch the game every single night before the game. We're also talking about the Gonzaga games throughout the entire contest. So check us out there. It is free to join, and there's a link in the show notes on audio and video platforms. Zags are 19-0. against the Tigers. They have never, ever lost to Pacific. And last year's 9-point win, that 99-90 game that was a little bit heart attack inducing for last year's team, that's the smallest margin of victory. That's the only time that a Gonzaga versus Pacific matchup has been within single digits. Now, Pacific joined the conference much later than the other teams in this conference who've been around through the entirety of the Mark Few era. And Pacific has also never really been particularly good in the WCC. They were I don't want to say unfortunate addition. That sounds kind of harsh, but frankly, they haven't really moved the needle in really any of the sports that they participate in. It's just they haven't been a particularly fruitful addition to the WCC since they joined the conference. And I know that some people who look at the WCC's current state and know that they're going to add more programs are kind of worried of like, we don't want to add another Pacific. And I understand that sentiment. And Pacific is a school that really hasn't. They had some good years when Damon Stoudemire was their head coach. Shout out to him, who's now the head coach at Georgia Tech. And guess what? Georgia Tech is playing above expectation, as I thought that they probably would, because Damon Stoudemire, if you can lead Pacific to a 500 record, you must be doing something right as a coach, because it is a tough place to coach. It is a tough location in Stockton, California. It's not a town people really want to spend a lot of time in. And if you're getting recruited by Pacific, you're probably getting recruited by other WCC schools or even Big West schools. And I think a lot of athletes would rather be in Moraga, or they're probably not getting recruited by St. Mary's, but in Santa Clara or in Davis or Sacramento, where Sac State is. Like, it's just a hard place to recruit. And you can feel that this program just hasn't really been able to meet those expectations. But Leonard Perry was kind of expected to kind of keep the train going post Damon Stoudemire era, and that has not been the case. And frankly, I think we're watching Leonard Perry coach his last season at Pacific, because this team is awful. They're 6-15 on the year. They're 0-6 in the WCC. Two of their wins are against non-Division I teams. Two of their wins are against Mississippi Valley State and Lemoyne. Mississippi Valley State is quite literally the worst team in college basketball, according to KenPom, and Pacific needed overtime to win that game. Lemoyne is also among the worst teams. They're a first-year Division I basketball program, and Pacific needed a game winner to beat them. Their other wins are against Lamar and Cal. Why not? At Cal. Why not, right? 5 pretty awful wins that are completely irrelevant, effectively, and then they go on the road and beat a Pac-12 school. Just a weird. It was the second game of the year. Cal is a brand new roster, new coach. They hadn't quite figured it out yet. Pacific has a little bit more continuity on their roster, was able to sneak a victory there. Doesn't mean much in the grand scheme of things, because they have been really, really bad outside of that. They have losses. They got beat by Nevada by 49 points. They got beat by Idaho by 30 points. Fresno State beat them by 36 points. UC Davis beat them by 21 points. They lost to North Dakota. They lost to Cal State Northridge. They lost to Northern Arizona. They lost to Fullerton, Sam Houston State, blah, 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 blah. You get it. This is not a good team. They're 0-6 in the WCC. Every single loss has been by multiple or by double digits, except, interestingly, San Francisco, who they took to overtime. Very baffling result there. Jonathan Mobo in that game had 30 and 18 rebounds, and was the reason that San Francisco did not suffer what would have been a horrendous loss to the Pacific Tigers. Pacific played St. Mary's on Thursday, shortly after the conclusion of the Gonzaga-San Francisco game. It was tied 10-10, and from that point on, St. Mary's won 66-18. Final score was 76-28. That gives you an indication of this Pacific team. It also gives you an indication of the absolute heater that the Gales of St. Mary's have been on lately. They are playing some excellent basketball. It's going to make next Saturday's game on February 3rd a really intense matchup between Gonzaga and St. Mary's, as it so often is, but certainly St. Mary's is the hotter team right now. We'll see if Gonzaga can kind of quell that on that home matchup next week. But Pacific, 348th at KenPom. There are 362 Division I teams. Pacific is 348th. In adjusted offensive efficiency, they are 338th. In adjusted defensive efficiency, they are 339th. They are consistently terrible at every aspect of basketball. Tempo, they're 128th. Doesn't really matter. They try to get out when they can, but just it doesn't really matter. They don't really get to dictate the pace with the way that they play. They're scoring about 65 points per game. They are shooting under 42% from the field. They are shooting under 31% from the three-point line. They are shooting 62.4% from the free throw line. This team just doesn't put the ball in the hole. They're just not an effective offensive team. They're among the biggest fallers from their preseason ranking at KenPom to now. Basically, they're among the most disappointing teams in college basketball. They're not going to get the attention of a Michigan State, of a UCLA, USC, either of those teams, but they are one of the, in terms of where they were expected to be, this has been a really bad season for this team. Judson Martindale, 10.2 points per game, shoots 38% from three. He's their only player in double figures. That's it. This is just, there's not much more to say about the specific team at this point. What we want to see from the Zags, full 40 minutes of dominance. Beat them like they did San Diego, where the result is determined by the second media timeout, where the only questions we have is at what point does Mark Few decide to put in Joe Few, to put in Colby Brooks, to put in Pavle Stosic. Gonzaga wants to kind of keep the gas on as long as they can because they are fighting for some net relevancy in case they don't win the WCC tournament. So it'll be interesting to see that. I'll be curious to see if Luka Krajnovic plays in this game. He's recovering from that wrist injury. We saw a video of him making a half-court shot before the game. He's still got his left hand wrapped up in a little bit of a brace, it looks like. So not sure if he'll get to play in this one. If he's ready, he certainly should play. Just because it's the kind of game where Gonzaga should have that kind of lead. But if he's not ready, of course, there's no need to push him back for a game like this either. Hopefully we also see a get-right game from Braden Huff. I think the inconsistency from Huff is going to be a storyline throughout the year. Most freshmen don't magically just like, boom, hit a spot in the second half of the year where they're just lights out for the rest of the year. It'd be great if Braden was able to do that. But I think this is a game for him to come in and, have that spark where he scores 8 points in the first 2 minutes of being on the floor and is just absolutely dominating from the moment he steps on the floor. It'd be great to see that version of Braden Huff in this game. That's going to wrap it up for us today and for this week. We will be back next week with more reviewing this game with some great mailbag stuff. Then we got the LMU Lions on Tuesday, the return of Dominic Harris to the kennel. That's a fun one that we're going to get to preview early next week. And then the rest of the week, we're going to be getting ready for that big one on Saturday against the Gales of St. Mary's. Thank you all for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Shout out to those everyday listeners. Shout out to those of you on the Discord channel as well. Have a fantastic weekend, folks. And as always, go Zags.